Dad, is Vanessa home right now? I just saw her board my ship. I checked her passport myself. It's definitely her. I froze. The phone felt like a block of ice against my ear. Upstairs, I could clearly hear the old pipes groaning as the shower ran. Then, the distinct creak of the floorboards, footsteps. The bathroom door opened, and a moment later, my daughter-in-law appeared at the top of the stairs, her dark hair wet, wrapped in a towel, smiling down at me. My heart completely stopped. If my daughter-in-law was standing right here in my house in Maryland, then who in God's name did my son just see boarding a cruise ship in Miami? Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here today. If that opening gave you chills, trust me, the truth of this story is infinitely darker and more twisted than you can imagine. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, and comment down below to let me know where you're watching from. Always remember to take care of your health wherever you are in the world. As a quick note, while this is a fictional story and not based on real events, the lessons learned about family, betrayal, and protecting your loved ones are deeply meaningful. Any similarities to actual persons or events are purely coincidental. Now, let's uncover exactly what happened in my home. It all started on what felt like a perfectly normal Tuesday morning. My younger son, Cameron, called me while I was standing at the kitchen sink. I had my hands deep in warm, soapy water, washing the breakfast dishes while watching the crisp November sun paint a golden hue across the harbor of Annapolis. I remember standing there, drying a plate, thinking about how my late wife, Margaret, would have absolutely loved a morning exactly like this. The air was sharp and crisp, the skies were a piercing, cloudless blue, and it was the kind of peaceful day that makes you deeply grateful just to be alive. But Margaret had been gone for 12 long years now. Over that decade, I had slowly learned how to carry my immense gratitude for the life we built, and my heavy grief for losing her in the exact same breath. Dad, Cameron's voice crackled through the phone speaker. It sounded a bit tinny, compressed by the distance and the satellite connection. But there was an urgent, sharp edge to his tone that immediately made me stand up straighter. He always called me Dad, never Pop, never Father, just Dad. It was always steady, always sure. That was Cameron. He was a man who had worked his way up to captaining massive luxury cruise ships by the time he was 30. He was used to commanding thousands of people and navigating through treacherous Caribbean storms. He was not a man who ever sounded rattled. I wiped my hands slowly on the dish towel, the blue one with little embroidered sailboats that my 7-year-old grandson, Noah, had picked out for me last Christmas. Cameron, I answered, keeping my voice light. Aren't you supposed to be halfway to Nassau by now? I thought the Ocean Majesty sailed out at dawn. We're docked in Miami for a crew rotation and some late boarding, he said. There was a profound silence on the line. It wasn't the comfortable, easy silence we sometimes shared on our regular Sunday afternoon phone calls. This was a heavy, suffocating silence, loaded with unspoken words. Cameron didn't hesitate. He was a man who made split-second decisions that affected thousands of lives. The fact that he was hesitating now sent a cold spike of adrenaline straight into my chest. Dad, I need to ask you something, he finally said, his voice dropping an octave. And I need you to stay absolutely calm. I set down the coffee mug I had been washing. It was Michael's favorite mug, a silly Father's Day gag gift from 3 years back that proudly proclaimed him the world's okayest son. Michael, my oldest boy, had a dry sense of humor, as dry as the Chesapeake Bay sand in July. What's wrong, son? I asked, my grip tightening on the edge of the granite counter. Nothing is wrong, exactly, it's just. Cameron exhaled, a long, slow breath that whistled into the receiver. Dad, is Vanessa home right now? I glanced up at the ceiling, looking toward the second floor, where I had heard the shower running for the past 20 minutes. My daughter-in-law, Vanessa, had moved in with me about 6 months ago. It happened right after Michael received a massive promotion to IT director at Chesapeake Digital Systems. Michael was working brutal hours, often traveling to Northern Virginia and Baltimore for high-stakes client meetings. Vanessa had suggested that moving into my large, mostly empty house would allow her to help me out, while I could help her with Noah while Michael was on the road. I had thought it was a remarkably sweet gesture at the time. A family coming together to support one another, She's upstairs, I said, frowning at the phone. She's taking a shower. Why? Is everything okay? More silence. Cameron? I pressed my heart beginning to thud against my ribs. Dad, that's not possible. Cameron's voice dropped even lower, nearly a strained whisper over the sound of ocean wind in the background. I'm looking at Vanessa right now. She is on my ship. The dish towel slipped from my hand, falling onto the hardwood floor with a soft thud. What in the world are you talking about? The Ocean Majesty? Cameron, you must be mistaken. She's right upstairs. Dad, I saw her passport myself when she boarded yesterday at the port of Miami. Boarding gate C, Cameron insisted, his tone dead serious. I was doing a random check at the terminal. I processed her check-in personally. Suite 124, premium deck. I thought it was incredibly weird that she didn't mention visiting me. But I figured maybe she wanted to surprise Michael for your anniversary or something. I didn't want to ruin the surprise. He paused, and I could hear a seagull crying in the background. 20 minutes ago, I saw her on the promenade deck, level 7. She was wearing a white sundress, and she was talking intimately with some man I didn't recognize. I called out to her, but she didn't hear me because there was too much wind. But Dad, I swear on my life, I am absolutely certain that was Vanessa. My heart did something very strange. It gave a hard skip, followed by a rapid double beat that instantly reminded me I was 68 years old and hadn't seen a cardiologist for a routine checkup in over 2 years. My blood ran completely cold. Cameron, that's literally impossible, I said, keeping my voice hushed. I heard her walking around this morning. She made breakfast for Noah before school. She drove him to Annapolis Elementary. I stood right here at this window and watched her silver Camry pull out of the driveway. So who did I just see? Upstairs, the shower water suddenly shut off. The old copper pipes groaned in the walls, the way they always did. Hold on, Cameron, I whispered. I left the phone sitting on the kitchen counter, the speakerphone still engaged, and walked silently to the base of the staircase. Michael had been up in Arlington all week for a massive database migration project. It was a critical job for a Northern Virginia client that had him working grueling 12-hour days. He had left early Monday morning, hauling his heavy laptop bag, promising to be back by Thursday night. That meant it was just me, Noah, and my daughter-in-law in the house. Or at least, whoever this woman was, Vanessa. I called up the wooden stairs, gripping the banister. No answer. I climbed slowly, taking it one step at a time. My knees weren't what they used to be. Too many years of crewing sailboats in the Naval Academy basin. The second-floor hallway smelled overwhelmingly of lavender soap, which was Vanessa's absolute favorite scent. The bathroom door stood slightly ajar. Thick, fragrant steam curled out into the hallway, like morning fog rolling over the bay water. Vanessa, are you okay up there? I called out again, my voice trembling just a fraction. A shadow moved fluidly behind the frosted glass of the shower door. Then, the glass door slid open. A woman stepped out onto the bath mat, tightly wrapped in a thick white towel. Her dark hair was dripping wet, clinging to her bare shoulders. I stared at her. She looked exactly like Vanessa. She had the exact same heart-shaped face, the same deep brown eyes. She even had the identical small, faint mole on her left collarbone. But as I looked closer, something felt deeply, fundamentally off. It was the way she held herself. Her posture was stiffer, her shoulders hunched slightly, her eyes darting around with a cautious, almost nervous energy that Vanessa never displayed. Vanessa was always confident, sometimes bordering on entitled. This woman looked like a deer caught in the headlights. Harold, a voice spoke from directly behind me. I spun around so fast I nearly lost my footing. Standing at the opposite end of the hallway, near Noah's bedroom, was Vanessa. Or rather, another woman who looked exactly, flawlessly like her. She was fully dressed in designer jeans and a burgundy cashmere sweater, her car keys dangling casually from her manicured fingers. Her hair was completely dry, perfectly styled in loose waves. She smiled at me, but the smile was incredibly forced. It didn't reach her eyes. Did you need something, Harold? I was just heading out to the farmer's market to pick up some fresh vegetables. I looked from the woman standing in front of me, fully dressed and dry, back to the woman shivering in the towel by the bathroom. then back to the woman with the keys. My brain violently stuttered. I was trying to make sense of geometry and reality that simply did not compute. They were identical, not just similar, identical. They shared the same height, the same build, the same facial structure. I even noticed the faint scar on the right eyebrow of the dressed woman's. A scar from a childhood bicycle accident Vanessa had complained about a dozen times. From the kitchen downstairs, Cameron's voice drifted up, small and distorted through the phone speaker. "Dad, are you still there? Dad, what's going on?" The woman in the towel gasped softly and clutched the terry cloth fabric tighter around her chest, her eyes wide with sheer panic. The woman in the sweater took a slow, calculated step forward, her forced smile dropping into a flat, cold expression. My mouth opened, but no words came out. I stood frozen in my own hallway, trapped between two women who both wore my daughter-in-law's face. How in God's name could she be in two places at once? One of them was standing in my house, and the other was supposedly cruising the Caribbean. But now there were two of them right here. I didn't sleep a single wink that night. I locked my bedroom door and lay awake in the dark, listening. Every single creak of the floorboards upstairs sounded like footsteps I couldn't trust. My mind raced through 1,000 impossible scenarios. Were they clones? Was I suffering from a terrible hallucination brought on by old age? No, I was perfectly lucid. I had seen them with my own two eyes. By the time dawn broke, painting the sky a bruised purple, I had made a firm decision. I wouldn't confront her. Not yet, my late wife, Margaret, always used to say, "Trust your eyes, Harold, but verify with your heart and your mind." I needed ironclad proof of what was happening in my home before I blew my son's marriage apart. So, I decided to observe. I would become a ghost in my own house, watching her every move. Tuesday morning, 3 days after Cameron's horrifying phone call, I came downstairs at 6:00 a.m. I stopped dead in my tracks at the entrance to the kitchen. The room was absolutely spotless. The granite counters gleamed. The breakfast dishes from Noah's early meal had already been washed, dried, and meticulously put away in the cupboards. The crisp, clean scent of a generic lemon cleaner hung heavily in the air. Vanessa stood at the stove, humming a cheerful little tune while she flipped golden brown pancakes. Her shoulders were completely relaxed, and she wore a genuine soft smile on her face. I stood there, gripping my empty coffee mug, racking my brain, trying to remember the last time I had ever seen my daughter-in-law act like this. The answer came quickly. Never. My real daughter-in-law absolutely despised cleaning. Not with any regularity. Anyway, Michael had complained about it in passing last summer, after having a few too many beers at our backyard barbecue. "Dad, I love her, I really do," he had sighed, rubbing his tired eyes. "But she leaves crusted pans and dishes in the sink for 3 straight days. I work 12 hours, and I come home to a pigsty." He had laughed it off as a quirky character flaw. I had kept my mouth firmly shut, knowing it wasn't my place to interfere in their marriage. But this woman, this identical copy humming cheerfully while she cooked a homemade breakfast from scratch, was entirely different. "Morning, Harold," she said, glancing warmly over her shoulder. "I made extra pancakes. Sit down, I'll pour you some coffee." I sat down at the kitchen table, watching her move around the space. Everything about her energy seemed lighter, kinder, less burdened by the entitled arrogance the real Vanessa usually carried. Noah thundered down the wooden stairs, his backpack slung over one shoulder, and grabbed a hot pancake with his bare hands. "These are so good, Mom." She turned and gently ruffled his hair, her eyes crinkling with genuine affection. "I'm so glad you like them, sweetie. Eat up. You need energy for school." After she drove Noah to school, I walked back into the kitchen and did a thorough inspection. The stainless steel sink was completely empty and spotless. I opened the dishwasher. It was also empty. She had hand-washed and dried every single item immediately after using it. I pulled out my smartphone and scrolled back through my photo gallery. I found a picture from Michael's 40th birthday party, back in August. In the background of the photo, visible through the kitchen doorway, our sink was stacked, dangerously high with dirty, crusted pans, greasy plates, and glasses with dried orange juice stuck to the bottom. Vanessa had been living with us for 2 months by that point. I set the phone down on the gleaming counter, an uneasy knot twisting violently in my stomach. Whoever this woman was, she was an imposter, and she was currently acting as my grandson's mother. The terrifying confirmation came the very next afternoon. On Wednesday, around 3 p.m., my next-door neighbor, Diane Morrison, knocked brightly on our back door. Diane was a sweet, nosy widow who had been friends with Margaret for decades. She swept into the kitchen carrying a large glass bowl, tightly covered with plastic wrap. "Harold," she beamed. "I was down at the city dock this morning, and the boats had just brought in the freshest catch. I made you a huge batch of my famous shrimp salad. You know, the one with the heavy Old Bay seasoning and chopped celery that Margaret always adored." My chest tightened painfully at the sudden mention of my wife, but I forced a polite smile. "Diane, you really didn't have to do that." "Oh, nonsense!" She waved me off, setting the heavy bowl on the counter. "Where's Vanessa? I want to say hello, I'm right here," a voice called out from the hallway. Vanessa, or the woman playing her, appeared. She was wearing simple blue jeans and a loose gray sweater, her hair pulled back into a messy ponytail. She smiled warmly at Diane, that same pleasant, soft smile I was starting to recognize as belonging strictly to the imposter. "Diane, how incredibly sweet of you," the imposter said, stepping into the kitchen. "Just being neighborly, dear," Diane chirped, pulling off the plastic wrap. "Fresh Chesapeake Bay shrimp. Don't let it sit in the fridge too long. It tastes absolutely best today." The smell hit the room immediately. It was a strong, briny sweetness mixed with heavy mayonnaise and sharp spices. "It looks absolutely delicious," the imposter said, her eyes lighting up. "Harold, let's try some right now." Diane happily grabbed a sleeve of butter crackers from my open pantry and set them on the table. "Go on, Harold, get some plates." I moved completely on autopilot, my brain buzzing. I pulled down 3 small ceramic plates while Diane scooped generous, chunky portions of the pink shrimp salad onto each one. She handed a plate to the imposter, one to me, and kept one for herself before settling into a chair at my kitchen table. "Go on, try it," Diane urged, her eyes shining with pride. "Tell me what you think." The imposter picked up a cracker, scooped a massive mound of the shrimp salad onto it, and brought it directly to her mouth. My hand froze entirely on my own plate. I stopped breathing. She chewed happily, swallowed, and her face broke into a delighted smile. "Oh, Diane, this is absolutely wonderful. Is that a hint of fresh dill I taste?" "Just a pinch," Diane beamed, thrilled by the compliment. "And a little squeeze of fresh lemon juice. It's my late mother's secret recipe." The imposter reached for another cracker. She scooped up another massive bite of shrimp, then another. She ate half the plate in less than 2 minutes. I couldn't move a single muscle. I couldn't draw breath into my lungs. My mind violently flashed back to the 4th of July. Just last year, we were standing in the crowded parking lot of Joseph Novak's bakery, watching the fireworks. Kids were running around with sparklers, American flags waving everywhere. Someone had brought a massive platter of authentic Maryland crab cakes and fresh blue crab from the bay. Vanessa had taken one single bite of a crab cake, just one. Within 3 short minutes, her face had ballooned with swelling. Her throat had closed up so incredibly fast that she collapsed onto the asphalt, gasping for air. Michael had to rip open her purse, find her prescribed EpiPen, and violently jam it into her thigh right there in the parking lot, while I frantically screamed at the 911 dispatcher. We had spent 6 terrifying hours at the Anne Arundel Medical Center, while the emergency room doctors monitored her erratic breathing and pumped her full of heavy steroids and antihistamines. The attending physician had been crystal clear, staring directly into Michael's eyes. Severe shellfish allergy. Any exposure whatsoever to shrimp, crab, or lobster could trigger immediate, fatal anaphylaxis. She needs to avoid it completely for the rest of her life. But now, this woman sat at my kitchen table, casually eating a massive plate of fresh bay shrimp salad with Diane Morrison, chatting happily about secret family recipes, like it was the most natural thing in the entire world. There was absolutely no swelling. There were no red hives breaking out on her neck. There was no frantic, choking gasp for air or desperate reaching for emergency medication. Nothing. She was perfectly fine, Harold. Diane's voice finally broke through the roaring static in my ears. "Harold, Honey, you haven't even touched yours. Is something wrong? No, I choked out, forcing myself to clear my painfully dry throat. I was just remembering something. It's wonderful, Diane. Thank you so much. Diane stayed for another 20 agonizing minutes, chatting aimlessly about the upcoming Maritime Festival in December. The imposter laughed at all the right moments, asked incredibly thoughtful, engaging questions, and played the part of the perfect daughter-in-law flawlessly. When Diane finally gathered her things and left, I stood frozen at the kitchen counter, staring down at the half-empty bowl of shrimp salad. My hands were shaking so violently, I had to grip the edge of the granite to steady myself. That evening, the cracks in the facade grew even wider. Noah came bounding down the stairs for dinner, wearing his favorite Baltimore Orioles jersey. He skidded to a halt in the kitchen, looked directly at the imposter, and tilted his head like a confused puppy. "Grandpa," he asked, tugging on my sleeve. "Yeah, buddy?" I replied, my heart in my throat. "How come Mom is so happy now?" The imposter's hand violently slipped. A heavy metal fork clattered loudly onto the wooden table, the sound echoing sharply in the quiet room. "What do you mean, champ?" I asked carefully, not taking my eyes off the woman. No scrunched up his nose, sniffing the air. "She's been singing a lot and she smells different. She smells like your boring soap, Grandpa, instead of the purple flowers she usually wears." Lavender, I thought quietly. The real Vanessa bathed in expensive lavender perfume. The imposter let out a laugh that was entirely too quick, too bright, and far too nervous. "I just ran out of my perfume, sweetheart. I'll pick up some more this weekend, I promise." Noah nodded, easily satisfied by the lie, and dug into his dinner. But I sat there, staring at the woman across the table. The twin, Michael, finally dragged himself home around 9 p.m. that night. I heard his heavy Audi pull into the driveway, the engine cutting off, followed by the exhausted, heavy sigh of a man who had just spent 10 straight hours staring at complex database code on computer screens. He walked into the kitchen, his tie loosened, his shirt sleeves rolled up to his elbows, his eyes deeply red-rimmed from strain. "Hey, Dad," he mumbled, dropping his heavy leather briefcase onto a chair. "Long day, the absolute longest." He grabbed a cold beer from the fridge, twisted off the metal cap, and took a long swig. "I found 3 more critical bugs in the client deployment. I have to be back up in Arlington first thing tomorrow morning. I probably won't be home until late Friday night, maybe even Saturday if things completely go south." He leaned over and pressed a tired kiss to the top of the imposter's head. She had been sitting quietly at the table, flipping nervously through a cooking magazine. "Don't wait up for me tomorrow night, okay?" Michael murmured. "Okay," she said softly, not looking up to meet his eyes. Michael drained half his beer in one gulp, mumbled something incoherent about desperately needing a hot shower, and trudged heavily up the stairs. He was completely, utterly exhausted. He was far too buried in server migrations, IT codes, and brutal client deadlines to notice that anything was different. He was completely oblivious to the fact that the woman sitting at his kitchen table, the woman he had just kissed, was an absolute stranger. That night, I locked the door to my study. I pulled out the worn, brown leather notebook that Margaret had given me for our 30th anniversary. I clicked open my pen and began to write, Day 1, Tuesday, November 7th. "Kitchen is spotless." She was humming while cooking. "The real Vanessa never cleans," Michael complained. "She leaves dishes for days." This woman washed everything immediately. Too cheerful. Wrong. Day 2, Wednesday, November 8th. Diane Morrison brought shrimp salad, homemade fresh bay shrimp. The imposter ate multiple servings in front of us. No reaction. The real Vanessa is severely allergic. 4th of July incident, we nearly lost her. This woman ate it like nothing. Day 3, Thursday, November 9th. No noticed Mom is so happy now. Also, the smell changed. Lavender perfume is gone, replaced by generic soap. She startled badly when he mentioned it. Michael came home exhausted, leaving for Arlington again tomorrow. He is completely oblivious. I pressed the pen down incredibly hard against the paper, the dark blue ink bleeding through the page. She's not my daughter-in-law, she is an imposter. But who exactly is she? And more importantly, where is the real Vanessa going while this fake plays house with my family? Thursday morning, I decided it was time to actively test her. I couldn't just sit back and watch anymore. Vanessa, I called out casually from the kitchen table. I was sitting with my steaming mug of dark roast coffee and the Capital Gazette spread out in front of me. She was standing at the granite counter, slicing fresh strawberries for Noah's school lunchbox. "Do you remember where we had Noah's 5th birthday party?" I asked. She paused. The sharp kitchen knife hovered motionless over the wooden cutting board. I watched her shoulders tense under her cotton sweater. She hesitated, her eyes darting slightly. "Here at the house, wasn't it?" "No," I said, my voice smooth but carrying a deliberate edge. "We had it at Quiet Waters Park, remember? Michael rented the large wooden pavilion right by the playground. It started pouring rain halfway through the afternoon, and all the screaming kids had to run under the shelter to avoid getting soaked. You made that incredible double-layer chocolate cake shaped exactly like a baseball glove." She let out a breathy, nervous laugh that sounded incredibly hollow. "Oh, right. I must have been thinking of a totally different year. It's so hard to keep track of all these birthdays." There was no different year. Noah had only celebrated 5 birthdays since Vanessa officially joined this family, and I remembered every single one of them. The real Vanessa had complained endlessly about the mud at Quiet Waters Park. She had bought a generic sheet cake from the grocery store, not a homemade chocolate baseball glove. This woman didn't know a thing about our family history. I folded the newspaper with a sharp, decisive snap. "I'm heading out for a bit. Do you need anything from town?" "No, I'm good, thanks, Harold," she replied. I grabbed my wool jacket and walked out the door before she could ask where I was going. Main Street Bakery sat just 3 blocks from our house. It was a narrow, charming brick storefront. Joseph Novak had run the bakery for over 20 years. The brass bell above the door chimed sharply when I walked in. "Hey, Joseph," I began, lowering my voice so the other patrons wouldn't hear. "Have you noticed anything different about Vanessa lately?" Joseph's hands slowed to a halt. He glanced cautiously toward the back of the shop, then leaned over the counter, dropping his voice to a hushed rumble. "You know, Harold, I have actually." He wiped his hands. "She used to come in here every single Saturday morning, regular as clockwork. She'd chat about Noah's youth soccer games, ask about my daughter. Real friendly, very talkative, and now..." I prompted, my heart beating faster. "It started maybe 6 months ago." Joseph said, "She still comes in, but it's different. She doesn't make eye contact anymore. Last week, she walked right past me on the sidewalk without even saying hello, like she had absolutely no idea who I was." I thanked Joseph and left. I walked straight toward the Annapolis Farmers Market. I found Joyce Lawson at her usual spot, arranging heirloom tomatoes. "Joyce," I wanted to ask, "have you noticed anything odd about Vanessa recently?" Her warm smile instantly faded. "Funny you should mention that, Harold. She came by last Thursday. I called out to her, and she just stopped and stared at me. She had this completely blank face, like she had no earthly idea who I was. Finally, she smiled this fake little smile and said, 'Oh, hi.' Then she grabbed the very first bag of snap peas she saw and practically ran away." Joyce shook her head in sheer bewilderment. Vanessa always used to spend 10 minutes picking through the tomatoes, asking detailed questions. But last week, she was like a completely different person. "How long has she been acting like this?" I asked. "About 6 months, Joyce confirmed. I walked home slowly. My mind was churning like a violent storm. 6 months. That was the exact same timeline Cameron had mentioned. When I finally got back to the house, Diane Morrison was sitting patiently on my front porch swing. "Harold, I brought you some homemade apple crisp," she said. "Is Vanessa home?" I wanted to say a quick hello. "She's inside," I said. "Diane, before you go in, can I ask you something? You mentioned yesterday that Vanessa seems different lately." Diane set the container down, her expression incredibly thoughtful. "She's kinder now, actually more attentive, but last week I mentioned Margaret's favorite flowers. You know those gorgeous purple irises she used to plant?" I nodded. "Vanessa looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language," Diane said. I actually had to remind her what the flowers were called. "Harold, Margaret talked about those specific flowers all the time. Vanessa should have easily remembered that. After she left, I climbed the wooden stairs to the second floor, stopped dead in front of the master bedroom, and walked inside. Margaret's antique jewelry box sat proudly on my heavy oak dresser, exactly where it had been for the last 12 years. It was made of dark cherry wood, secured by a tiny key that I kept hidden. My hands were shaking violently as I unlocked it and slowly lifted the heavy wooden lid. The top velvet-lined tray was completely empty. I lifted the top tray out, my breathing becoming shallow. The bottom compartment was entirely empty, too. I fell onto the edge of my mattress, the empty wooden box clutched tightly in my hands. Margaret's engagement ring, a flawless 5-carat diamond set in pristine white gold. The ring I had saved for 6 brutal months to buy when I was 23 years old. Gone, the authentic Akoya pearl necklace I had proudly given her for our 25th wedding anniversary. Gone, the vintage Omega Seamaster watch that had belonged to my late grandfather. Gone. I violently yanked open the bottom drawer of the dresser, checking the hidden compartment where she had kept her most prized possession. The small diamond watch with the deep blue sapphires around the face. Also gone. I sat there on the edge of the bed for a long, agonizing time, staring blankly down at the empty velvet lining. The engagement ring alone was easily worth $15,000. The pearl necklace was valued at $25. The vintage gold watch would fetch at least $12. The diamond and sapphire watch was priceless, but insured for $13,000. $65. Maybe far more. All of it stolen, all of it gone. Downstairs, I heard the heavy front door open. Vanessa's bright, fake voice called up the stairs. "Harold! I'm taking Noah to his soccer practice. We'll be back around 5 o'clock. The heavy door closed again. I looked down at the empty cherrywood box. She wasn't just faking being a mother and a wife. She was systematically stealing from us. But why? And who on earth was helping her pull this off? I needed advice. That late afternoon, I drove my old Honda down to City Dock Coffee. Vernon Nash was already there, sitting patiently at our usual corner table. Vernon and I had known each other for 40 solid years. He had been a brilliant structural engineer before he retired, approaching every single problem with cold logic. He looked up when I approached, took one look at my face, and immediately set down his pen. "You look absolutely terrible," he said bluntly. I took a massive, shuddering breath and just started talking. I told him everything: Cameron's frantic call, the impossible shower incident, the suspicious kitchen cleaning, the shrimp salad, the conversations with Joseph and Joyce. And finally, my voice cracking, I told him about the empty jewelry box. $65,000 worth of Margaret's most precious belongings vanished. Vernon listened in absolute silence. When I finished, he was quiet for a long, agonizing moment. Then he leaned heavily forward. "You think someone is impersonating her," he stated. "I know it sounds completely crazy," I said. "It doesn't sound crazy at all," he replied. "It sounds like you've been paying very close attention. The real question is, Harold, what exactly are you going to do about it?" "I don't know. Do I call the police?" "Confront her, and your son doesn't see any of this." Vernon asked. "Michael is barely home. He got promoted to CTO 6 months ago. He's up in Arlington 3 or 4 days a week. When he is home, he stumbles in at 10 at night, completely exhausted." So Vernon surmised, whoever this woman is, she only shows up at your house when Michael is gone. "Exactly," I said. "She's been incredibly careful. You need solid proof, Harold," Vernon said firmly. "Follow her. Next time she leaves the house, get in your car and see exactly where she goes. See who she meets. If someone is actively helping her pull off an elaborate scam like this, she will eventually lead you right to them." The very next afternoon, Friday, I put the surveillance plan into action. Michael had left the house at the crack of dawn. Noah was safely at school until 3 p.m. Around 1 o'clock, I heard the distinct jingle of Vanessa's car keys. She called up the stairs. "Harold, I'm running some boring errands. I'll be back in a couple of hours." The heavy oak front door slammed shut. I grabbed my own keys and my jacket, moving as quickly as my old knees would allow. By the time I got outside to my car, a 10-year-old gray Honda Accord she was already pulling away from the curb. I pulled out and followed her. She drove east through downtown Annapolis, crossing the Spa Creek Bridge into the working-class Eastport neighborhood. 3 miles away from our large Victorian home, she turned onto Clay Street and slowed her Camry to a crawl. I immediately hung back, pulling my Honda over near the street corner. I watched intently as she parked in front of a small, incredibly run-down house halfway down the block. Number 89, it was a small, single-story wooden structure painted a faded, depressing blue-gray. The wooden front porch sagged visibly under its own weight. Faded, yellowing curtains hung crookedly in the front windows. This was absolutely not the kind of place you would ever expect to find someone who had just stolen $65.00 in fine jewelry. The imposter got out of her Camry, glanced nervously up and down the empty street, and walked swiftly up to the front door. She didn't knock. She just opened it and walked inside like she actually lived there. I sat completely frozen in my car, waiting 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. At the 20-minute mark, the suspense was literally killing me. I got out of my car and walked slowly down the cracked sidewalk, trying my hardest to look casual. Just an old man out for a brisk afternoon stroll. When I finally reached number 89, I paused near the sagging porch, pretending to bend down and tie my shoe. I quickly glanced up toward the front window. The faded yellow curtain shifted slightly in the breeze, and I saw them. 2 women were standing side by side in what looked like a small, incredibly cluttered living room. They were perfectly, undeniably identical. They had the same height, the same slender build, the same dark hair pulled back into messy ponytails, the exact same posture. One wore jeans and a gray sweater, the exact outfit the imposter had worn when she left my house. The other wore a loose, cheap cardigan over a simple, faded dress. They were talking rapidly to each other, gesturing wildly with their hands. I couldn't hear a single word they were saying through the dirty glass, but their animated faces were familiar, recognizable, and completely impossibly the same. I stared, frozen on the cracked sidewalk, my mind violently refusing to process the reality of what my eyes were seeing. Twins, dear God, they're twins. When I finally made it back home that Friday evening, my hands were still shaking violently against the steering wheel. I walked straight past the kitchen, ignoring the smell of dinner the imposter was cooking, went directly into my study, and locked the heavy wooden door behind me. I sat in the pitch-black room for 20 solid minutes, simply trying to process what my eyes had just seen. Twins. My daughter-in-law had an identical twin sister, and they had been secretly switching places. For how long? 6 months longer? I clicked on the small brass desk lamp and pulled open the heavy metal filing cabinet tucked into the corner of the room. This was where Michael kept copies of all his important household paperwork, bank statements, mortgage documents, insurance policies, utility bills. He had casually left them in my study for safekeeping right after Vanessa moved in. I pulled out the thick folder labeled joint accounts and frantically spread the last 6 months of bank statements across the surface of my desk. At first glance, everything looked perfectly normal. But as I traced my finger down the columns of numbers, a chilling pattern began to emerge. Cash withdrawals, massive ones, $1,500 here, $2,000 there. They were always pulled directly from Vanessa's debit card, tied to the joint savings account she shared with Michael. Over the past 6 months, I calculated the math in my head. Nearly $4,000 a month had been steadily, quietly draining out of their life savings in irregular, untraceable chunks. I aggressively made notes in the margins, adding up the horrifying totals. Over $27,000 in raw cash had simply vanished from the savings. But as I kept digging, the numbers grew. A wire transfer for $12,000, another for $18. Zuzin, in total. A staggering 95 Zuzins had been drained, and that was just the beginning. Digging deeper into the pile, I found a sealed, official-looking letter that had been misfiled, aggressively shoved between 2 old credit card statements. The thick envelope was formally addressed to Michael, but it had clearly been torn open and hastily hidden. I pulled out the crisp letter and read it twice. My pulse climbed to a dangerous rhythm with every single printed word. Dear Mr. Mitchell, congratulations, your personal loan application for the amount of $150, Milo Zero, has been officially approved. Please review the attached repayment schedule and signed the enclosed legal documents. $150,000. Michael had absolutely never mentioned needing or taking out a massive personal loan. With his recent promotion to CTO, his six-figure salary was incredibly solid. There was zero logical reason he would ever need to borrow that kind of staggering money. Unless, of course, he hadn't taken it out at all. I frantically dug through the cabinet until I found Michael's old tax returns. I laid the tax return flat next to the loan documents and stared at them under the harsh light of the desk lamp. The signatures did not match. Michael's real signature had a very distinctive sharp loop in the M, ending with an aggressive, angular final stroke. The signature forged on the loan paperwork was incredibly close, but the M was noticeably rounder, the final angle much softer and hesitant. It was a forgery. I slumped back into my leather chair, the loan letter trembling uncontrollably in my hands. She wasn't just stealing jewelry to pawn. She wasn't just taking cash for shopping. She was systematically stealing my son's identity and destroying his financial future. 65 so's in jewelry, $95 from savings, of $150 forged loan, $300 so's total. 3 days later, on a quiet Monday afternoon, I drove back to the rundown house in Eastport. I parked my Honda across the street, took a deep, steadying breath, and walked heavily up to the front door. I knocked 3 times. I heard soft footsteps shuffling inside. The wooden door opened just a crack. The security chain still engaged. A woman's face appeared in the narrow gap. It was the exact same face I had been looking at over the dinner table for the past 10 months. But it was fundamentally different. The eyes were softer, filled with deep uncertainty, lacking the arrogant spark Vanessa always carried. She was wearing an old frayed gray cardigan over a plain shirt, with absolutely zero makeup on her pale face. "Can I help you?" Her voice was incredibly quiet, much more tentative and fragile than Vanessa's confident tone. "My name is Harold Mitchell," I said, my voice steady and firm. "I am Michael's father, and I know all about you and Vanessa." Her face went completely white. The color literally drained from her cheeks in a millisecond set. I don't," she stammered, her hand trembling on the doorframe. "Please," I said softly, holding up my hands to show I meant no physical harm. "I am not here to cause trouble, and I'm not here to yell at you. I just desperately need to understand what is happening to my family." She unlatched the chain, stepped back, and opened the door wider. "You should come in." The living room was incredibly small, highly cluttered, but it was meticulously clean. There was a severely worn floral couch and a wooden shelf completely overflowing with heavy medical textbooks. She sat nervously on the very edge of the couch, her hands violently twisting together in her lap. "How did you find me?" she whispered, staring at the floor. "I followed Vanessa," I said simply, sitting in an armchair across from her. "I saw both of you through the front window last Friday." "What is your name?" "Olivia," she said. "Olivia Caldwell, and Vanessa is your twin sister." "Yes." Her voice cracked, a tear spilling over her lashes. "Mr. Mitchell, I am so incredibly sorry. I swear to you, I didn't know. I honestly didn't know she was lying to you. Or to Michael. She told me she just desperately needed some time away. Some freedom. She claimed her husband worked all the time, completely ignored her, and she felt trapped and depressed. When do you replace her?" I asked, leaning forward. "How often?" Olivia wiped her wet eyes with the back of her frayed sleeve. "Only when her husband is traveling for work. Vanessa calls me late the night before, tells me Michael will be gone for 2 or 3 days, and says she urgently needs me to stay at the house. I usually arrive early in the morning, right after Michael leaves for the airport. I stay with you and Noah. Then, the night before Michael comes home, Vanessa texts me, and I leave through the back door. She is always back in the house before he walks through the front door." "So Michael has never actually seen you?" "Never." Olivia confirmed. Vanessa was incredibly careful about that rule. "I didn't think it was wrong, Mr. Mitchell. I thought I was just giving my exhausted sister a break. She was spending that time with another man," I said quietly, letting the brutal truth fall into the room. Olivia's face violently crumpled. "Oh, God, no, I didn't know. How much is she paying you for this?" I demanded. Olivia looked down at her twisting hands, her face burning bright red with shame. $1,200 each time. Suddenly, a door opened somewhere in the dark back hallway of the house. Another woman appeared. She was older, maybe in her early 70s, with thin silver hair pulled back into a neat bun and incredibly kind. Tired eyes. She wore a faded floral house dress and held a damp dish towel in her hands. "Olivia, honey, what's going on? Who is this gentleman?" "Ruth," Olivia started, her voice breaking into a sob. "This is Harold Mitchell, Michael's father." Ruth set down the dish towel carefully on the dining table, her expression shifting instantly from confusion to deep understanding. She walked over, sat heavily down next to Olivia, and wrapped a protective, frail arm around the younger woman. "My name is Ruth Anderson," she said, her voice surprisingly strong. "I am Olivia's foster mother, and before you judge this poor girl too harshly, Mr. Mitchell, you should know exactly why she's doing this. My husband, Howard, is severely ill. He has severe, terminal complications in his lungs from working 30 brutal years in a chemical factory. I have a bad heart and can barely walk some days. The medical bills for his oxygen, his treatments, and his home care are over $800 every single month." I felt the anger in my chest begin to crack, replaced by a cold horror. "Olivia dropped out of college 10 years ago just to take care of us," Ruth continued. "She works a grueling part-time job as a bookkeeper, but it's barely enough to keep the lights on, let alone pay the hospital. So when her long-lost sister showed up 6 months ago, flashing money and offering $200 just to babysit a nice house for a few days, what was she supposed to do? Let her father suffocate?" I looked at Olivia. She was sobbing uncontrollably into her hands. "I thought she just needed a break," she wailed. "My parents are all I have. I can't let them suffer." "Does Vanessa know about the loan?" I asked quietly. "The $150,000 personal loan she fraudulently took out in my son's name." Olivia's head snapped up so fast her neck cracked. "The what? A loan? No. I swear to God, I don't know anything about a loan. She never mentioned money like that." She looked genuinely, horrifyingly shocked. "Where exactly is Vanessa when you are staying at my house?" I asked. Olivia wiped her eyes, smudging her tears. "With a man. She didn't tell me much about him, just that he was wealthy and exciting. But I know his name. What is it?" She looked at me, her expression entirely miserable. "Preston Whitmore. That afternoon, I met Vernon at City Dock Coffee again." "You need a private investigator," Vernon said bluntly before I even sat down. 20 minutes later, Rick Morrison walked up to our table. He was a retired Baltimore PD detective and highly alert. I slid a cocktail napkin across the table with the name Preston Whitmore written in block letters. "I need to know absolutely everything about this man." 7 days later, Morrison called me to his cramped, messy office in Eastport. He opened a thick manila folder and pulled out a blown-up driver's license photo. The man in the picture was handsome, likely in his late 40s, with perfectly styled dark hair, graying distinguishedly at the temples, and a blinding, confident smile. "Preston Whitmore does not exist," Morrison said flatly. "His real name is Derek Allen Hayes. He's 51 years old, originally from Richmond, Virginia, and he is a professional, highly dangerous con artist specializing in romance fraud." My stomach dropped straight through the floorboards. "He's been highly active for at least 8 known years," Morrison continued. "He targets vulnerable or bored, married women, convinces them he loves them, manipulates them into stealing massive amounts of money from their families, and then entirely disappears like a ghost with the cash. Total documented losses? Over $1 million. Morrison spread out several surveillance photos. They showed Derek Hayes or Preston with 3 different women. He was smiling that same confident smile in all of them. One showed him walking hand in hand with a blonde, another kissing a redhead outside a luxury hotel. "He is currently dating at least 3 other women that I could track," Morrison said grimly. "Your daughter-in-law is not special, Mr. Mitchell. She is just one mark among many, a piggy bank." I stared at the glossy photos, a deep primal rage building in my chest. Tomorrow, he wouldn't be there, but Vanessa would, and it was time for her to face exactly what she had done. The night before the confrontation, I sat completely alone in my locked study. Tomorrow night, every single one of these terrible secrets would finally come into the light. And I needed to be entirely ready. I called Cameron first. I need you to come home tomorrow. Cameron, can you get a flight up from Miami? He agreed immediately. I called Vernon and Detective Morrison, asking them to bring all the evidence. I called Olivia. Olivia, I need you to come to my house tomorrow evening at 6:30. Vanessa needs to finally face exactly what she's done. She was terrified, but agreed. Finally, I called Michael in Arlington and demanded he come home for a critical family dinner. I arranged for Noah to sleep over at Diane's house to completely protect him from the fallout. At 6:17 p.m., Michael arrived first. His Audi pulled aggressively into the driveway. Dad? What's going on? Where's Noah? Before I could answer, Cameron strode through the front door carrying his duffel bag, still in his cruise line uniform. Vernon and Detective Porrett arrived right behind him. At exactly 6:25 p.m., Olivia Caldwell stood shivering on my porch. She wore her simple gray cardigan, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. She stepped inside, hesitantly. Michael had been nervously pouring water in the kitchen. He walked into the archway just as Olivia entered. The glass violently slipped from his hands, shattering into 100 sharp pieces on the hardwood floor. Vanessa? He choked out. He stared at Olivia, his face a perfect mask of total shock. But Michael wasn't listening. He turned slightly toward the living room, and that is when he saw her. The real Vanessa stood near the brick fireplace in designer dark jeans and a luxurious burgundy cashmere sweater. She had been watching silently from the shadows. Michael looked from Olivia by the door to Vanessa by the fireplace. What? What the hell is this? Are there two Vanessas? Sit down, Michael, Cameron urged, guiding him to a heavy oak chair at the dining room table. Everyone took their seats. The ticking antique clock read 6:30 p.m. I stood at the head of the long table, my hands resting heavily on the massive stack of documents. This is Olivia Caldwell. She is Vanessa's identical twin sister. That is completely impossible. Michael exploded. Vanessa does not have a sister. She grew up in foster care. Cameron slid his smartphone across the table, showing the photo of Vanessa boarding the cruise ship. The MS Ocean Majesty. 10 days ago I processed her check-in myself, Mike. Michael turned slowly toward Olivia. Did you pretend to be my wife? Yes, Olivia sobbed brokenly. Vanessa contacted me 6 months ago. She offered to pay me $200 each time I stayed at your house. My foster parents are very ill. The medical bills are $500 to $800 a month. I didn't know she was stealing. Michael turned back to Vanessa, pure betrayal on his face. Is that true? You paid a stranger to raise our son while I was gone? Vanessa lifted her head, her eyes completely cold. Yes. Michael physically staggered. Why would you do this? I loved you because I was suffocating. Vanessa shouted back, her voice cracking with sudden rage. You were never home, Michael. Never. Always in Arlington working 12-hour days. I was completely alone. I stepped forward and slammed the empty cherrywood jewelry box onto the table. Margaret's engagement ring, the pearl necklace, the gold watch, the diamond watch, $65. Susan worth. Gone. I spread the bank statements across the table. Massive cash withdrawals and wire transfers. $95,000 aggressively drained from savings. Finally, I slammed down the official loan document. A fraudulent personal loan for $150. $1,000. Look at the forged signature, Michael. Michael stared at the papers, his face going violently red. $310,000, Vanessa. How could you possibly do this? Detective Morrison stood up, sliding the photo of Preston Whitmore across the table. The incredibly wealthy man you've been seeing. His real name is Derek Allen Hayes, 51 years old. From Richmond, he is a professional, highly wanted con artist specializing in romance fraud. He aggressively targets lonely married women, drains their accounts, and disappears. Vanessa stared at the photo, her face completely crumbling. No, you're entirely wrong. Preston isn't. He wouldn't do that to me. Vernon held up his phone, showing the surveillance photos of Preston, with 3 other women. He is currently running the exact same scam on at least 3 other women right now as we speak. Where is the money? Morrison pressed firmly. I gave it to Preston, Vanessa whispered, her voice breaking. He said he was investing it for us, a new life in the Cayman Islands, a massive oceanfront villa. He lied, Morrison stated coldly. The money is gone, Vanessa. You are never, ever going to see a single dime of it again. No, Vanessa screamed, her delusion returning. He loves me. We had real plans. She turned viciously on Olivia. You ruined it all. You were supposed to just keep your stupid mouth shut. I'm sorry, Vanessa, Olivia wept. I didn't know you were stealing, that is enough, I said dangerously. You made your terrible choices. Now you will live with them. Vanessa grabbed her expensive purse. Fine, I'm entirely done with all of you. She turned sharply and headed straight for the front door. I heard her car engine violently roar to life, and she disappeared down the street, heading toward Baltimore. Michael sank heavily into the armchair, burying his devastated face in his hands, and finally began to sob. I put my heavy hand firmly on his shaking shoulder. It's over, son, I said quietly. The loud, jarring ring of the house phone shattered the silence at 11 p.m. on Tuesday. I grabbed the heavy receiver. Harold, I urgently need your help. It was Vanessa. She sounded completely broken. Baltimore, a cheap motel off Route 40. I didn't know who else to call. What happened? I asked. I contacted Preston immediately after I left your house. She wept. He told me to meet him at a hotel. He walked me through aggressively transferring all the money we had stolen into a joint offshore account. Almost 300,000, Harold. Everything I had left this morning. I woke up, and he was completely gone. The room was empty. The joint account was cleaned out. Zero. He used me exactly the way I used Michael. Come back here, Vanessa. Turn yourself in, I said coldly. We are calling the FBI in the morning. If you cooperate, they might reduce your charges. Thursday afternoon, FBI Special Agent Sarah Brooks sat confidently on our couch. She was in her late 30s with sharp, calculating eyes. Vanessa sat heavily in an armchair, looking absolutely terrible. From Caldwell, Brooks said directly, you are facing severe federal charges, but if you cooperate fully and help us catch Derek Hayes, we can aggressively work with the prosecutor. Vanessa handed over a thick envelope of wire transfer confirmations and text messages. Brooks pulled out a time-stamped photo from 2 days ago, showing Derek Hayes at BWI Airport. He finally made a massive mistake, Brooks smiled. He booked a flight out of BWI for tomorrow morning at 6:30 a.m. destination, Grand Cayman. Tomorrow morning, we will be waiting for him. The alarm clock buzzed aggressively at 4:30 the next morning. Michael and I drove in complete silence to BWI Airport. We met Agent Brooks at Terminal A departures at 5:30 a.m. 4 other undercover federal agents were perfectly scattered around the check-in area. At exactly 6:15 a.m., Preston Whitmore Derek Hayes walked smoothly through the sliding doors, wearing an incredibly expensive gray tailored suit. Agent Brooks stepped forward smoothly, flashing her silver badge. Derek Allen Hayes, FBI, you are officially under arrest. Preston instantly bolted. He dropped his expensive bag and sprinted aggressively toward the exit doors. But the FBI agents violently cut him off, grabbed his arms, and forcefully slammed him face first against a concrete column, snapping heavy steel handcuffs onto his wrists. Agents aggressively searched his bag, pulling out $80,000 in raw cash. Brooks checked her phone. The offshore account is still fully active. $140,000 is sitting right in it. $220,000 total. The other $90,000 you successfully wired offshore is permanently gone. But this, we are keeping. Preston stared blankly at the airport floor as they led him away. Michael let out a heavy breath. It's really over, Dad. 2 agonizing weeks later, in the Anne Arundel County Circuit Court, the judge handed down the sentences. Derek Hayes received exactly 18 years in a federal prison. Vanessa Caldwell received 2 years of strict probation, 500 hours of mandatory community service, and was ordered to pay $90,000 in restitution. Michael was officially granted full, sole legal custody of Noah. A week after the sentencing, I received an official check from the FBI for $220,000, the successfully recovered funds. I aggressively thought about Olivia, desperate, heavily manipulated by her own sister, trying to pay for her dying father's medical bills. I wrote a personal check for $50,000 and drove to Eastport. I handed it directly to Ruth Anderson. This will fully cover your medical bills and aggressively move Howard to a better care facility. Ruth and Olivia wept with gratitude. 6 months passed. Michael was healing beautifully through intense weekly therapy. He was thriving as the CTO and coaching Noah's youth soccer team. Olivia had found her rhythm, working full-time supporting Ruth and becoming a true, undeniable part of our family as Aunt Liv. I used to firmly think lies were simple, right or wrong, but lies live in the dark shadows. They grow like weeds, slowly strangling everything real. Vanessa's lies had nearly destroyed us completely, but Olivia's truth had saved us. If you've walked this incredibly dark journey with me to the very end, thank you. What would you do if you discovered your daughter-in-law was secretly living a double life? Let me know in the comments below. If this story touched you, please like and subscribe. Take care of yourselves and protect your families.